Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and I'd like to greetings to you all, the fellow pilots and the controllers from all over the world, president for both associations, the senior management of CAD. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jeff Lee. I'm an ordinary controller. Okay, I'm an ordinary controller working on a daily basis in the control room. I have tower ratings, approach ratings, terminal ratings, and sometimes I'll work as a supervisor. And before that, I also train some of the younger controllers through the system. So here, what we're going to do today here, we'd like to share together with Captain Henry Chan some of the thoughts about handling emergencies. Okay. So first of all, the outline for today, we'll begin with going through some of the things between pilots and ATC considerations in handling of emergency in very general terms. Okay, and then we also bring up some scenarios that with the thoughts of both pilots and controllers, how we can work together and what are the challenges we have when we're going through in handling these emergencies. Okay, and the idea of this presentation is not a textbook introduction of how to handle emergencies, but rather we would like to provoke thoughts about how emergencies and unusual situations are handled, some of the considerations to be made, and perhaps dispel some myths as what is written here. And in fact, most of this presentation from our part is copied from the training materials. I'm not going to go through those in details, but just to give you guys a brief idea what kind of training a controller would receive during handling of emergencies. Okay, and obviously some disclaimer, there's rarely a single correct way to deal with emergencies, and what we are trying to do is to say the differences between the pilots and the controllers and see how we can make better understanding of each other. And then first thing first, I'm sorry, we have to barge in from the controller side. In emergency, we always talk about communication, okay? So it is quite important, it's actually very important as a controller that you state your emergency state, whether it's a distress or urgency, okay? So a mayday call or pan-pan call obviously is the standard phraseology to be used. Okay, and in fact, is to my as a personal view, is your ticket to get all the priorities as insistent you get from ATC. If you state you have an emergency, the whole world will be beyond you. The supervisors, the controllers will all pay attention and give you all the priorities, all the help we think we could give it to you. Okay. So next, I'll pass it on to Henry to talk about, from pilot perspective, what an emergency is about.
Thank you. So from the pilot's perspective, the things we're talking about for our fellow pilots, it will be a very general considerations, because if we go into all the details, that will take a lot of time, and it's not going to assist the discussions too much. But anyways, Jeff has already mentioned communications is very important to them, and for the next few pages, I'm sure that you will find that we have different priorities. But anyways, we start off with what are emergencies that for ATC friends as well. It's abnormal situations, non-routine. That's basically anything that we don't expect to happen. We'll talk about what's happening in the cockpit, and examples will be discussed at the later part of this presentation. Whenever we talk about a non-routine or abnormal situations, there's always a surprise element. We don't plan for non-routine or emergencies. We don't say, okay, this takeoff, we are going to have problem A, B, and C, and it's going to happen, and we're going to do it. It's not going to happen in real life, so there's always a surprise element. And whenever something non-routine happened, the workload in the cockpit increased significantly. partly because there's extra procedures we have to carry out, we have to deal with, but also the mental capacity that taken away from normal operations to consider, basically to clarify what's happening to start with, what is the problem, and what is my situation, and how can I deal with it. And this is where the priority is different from our ATC friends. This is the golden rules we were taught during day one of our piloting. We call it aviate, navigate, communicate, which basically fly, navigate, communicate. So for our ATC friends, you can see that the first priority we have during these situations is fly the aircraft. There's no point if we get a ticket and declare the case in the perfect radio call, we crash the aircraft. Therefore, the first priority for us is to fly the aircraft, basically have it under control. Navigate, which means we fly the aircraft and we control the aircraft to where we want it or we're supposed to go. Hong Kong is a classic example with terrain all around us. If we have emergency, we fly the aircraft, okay, we fly it, we can fly it now, and then we're heading straight to a terrain. It's not going to help. Therefore, the second priority is navigate. And afterwards is communication. We understand our air traffic controllers would like to have more information from us about what's happening, but in the sequence of we dealing with these situations, unfortunately communications come to lower priorities. And also for communications, it's not just ATC. We will have to communicate to a lot of parties, to our cabin crew and passengers in the back. For commercial considerations, we have to contact our company to arrange supports and let them know what's going on. And of course to our air traffic controllers so that they can offer the assistance which we may require. And in most cases, these emergencies will request assistance coming back to land. Just a very general idea of what support we would like to from our air traffic controllers. Please understand that there's a lot of times you guys are asking what is happening now, what do you want to do now. Unfortunately, because we explained earlier, we need time to form a plan and to get the situation under control before we can give you a reply. So we would like air traffic controllers to give us time to respond to your questions. Later on, we would be requesting vectoring assistance. We will be giving examples during the scenarios that what kind of vectoring assistance and why we need them from you. And also in a lot of cases, we would like to have observations from controllers, especially from the VCR, from tower controllers. After we landed, there's any difference in configurations, or you see any smoke or any observations that you can see. Your feedback is very valuable. That will help us to make our judgment. Jeff.
Thank you, Henry. Next, I would like to talk about how ATC handling emergency with our perspectives, again with observation. I will also talk about actually our department-owned acronyms for how to handle emergencies. We call it ASSIST, and some of the considerations in general for handling emergencies. First of all, there's sometimes we're working in the center or working in the tower, whatever. In different places, the flight crew may be reluctant to use the standard phraseologies to inform that you have or they have some kind of emergencies. Sometimes they just transmit on the radios, we have a particular problem with us using the standard phraseologies, PAN or emergencies or Mayday. In fact, in either way, as soon as we notice something is going on in the cockpit, we will start to, well, as a controller, I will start to think about what actually you need and what is going on. But obviously there's some uncertainties within before we knew the whole problem. What is exactly the problem, what kind of assistance you want, or what kind of assistance we can offer you. Okay, so usually, but however, more often, the emergency start with a statement of a problem, whether you have a flat problem or your hydraulics or you have some engine problems. You would like to run a checklist. So that indicates you need help, and very quickly the controller should be able to respond to you, Roger. Okay, and then in our training, we always allow the pilots to take time to think about what is the problem, go through the checklists, and while we'll inform everybody who need to know in the room something is going on, so we are prepared to handle our emergency. Okay, but again, we would like the pilots to declare a state of pan on Mayday to officially indicate that you need assistance. All right. Let's go through a general scenario, let's say, of emergencies. Sometimes if the crew is not responding to transmission, it could indicate either a radio problem or they're just too busy with something, probably handling a technical difficulty, or they may have some state of emergency. So it could be come up with a request to stand by, which as a controller, we would allow time for you to tackle your problem before you let us know what is going on and what kind of assistance you need. Sometimes the voice on the radio may not indicate the seriousness of the problem, because it can be very calm or very dramatic. It doesn't matter. Okay. But we always try to think what is going on and what we have to do. Actually, it's the other way around, what we have to do to help you out. Okay. However, well, we also like to state that the term field emergency or medical emergency is not an official term to ATC that you need assistance. So please, if you have a Mayday field or you have a medical pan, do let us know with the official terminology, so that all across the room will know. We will come to an agreement, and we will know that, okay, you need some kind of help with priority. Okay. A little bit of procedures for ATC to handle emergencies. We use the acronym ASSIST, A-S-S-I-S-T. First, we acknowledge and understand the call. It could be a Mayday call, pan call, or as I mentioned before, it could be just a general description of you're having a problem and you need some help. Okay. So as soon as we receive this call, very quickly the controller will grab assistance from anybody they could get. Mostly the colleagues next to him or her, or the supervisor, because we know that something is going on. And then in the meantime, while you are tackling your perhaps QRH or your procedures, we still have to separate other traffic from that aircraft. Maybe you want to stay on a particular heading, or maybe you want to level off. So that may create new conflicts from other aircraft. So obviously, if you're in an emergency, we will not expect you to respond to our vectoring or ATC instruction. So most likely is we will have to think, okay, who will be the traffic to this aircraft in emergency? How can I separate the aircraft from others? Still, there are other aircraft on the frequency that we will work on. Okay, if the frequency is busy, or it seems that we have difficulties communicating with the aircraft in emergency, we may want to silence the radio on that frequency, such that there's opportunities for the crew to let us know what is going on. Okay, we can do it in various ways. We can ask other aircraft which is not on the frequency, not on emergency, to go over to a separate frequency, which our facility can obviously facilitate on a separate frequency. Or we can ask the aircraft with emergency, but this is rather unlikely, is to go to a discrete frequency to continue for us to handle your emergencies. Okay. And inform those who need to help, obviously mentioned before, supervisors, colleagues next to us. And in ATC, in our environment, we have work as a team. So we have many different sectors, many different units. So it's not only that particular sector who is handling that emergency need to be informed what is going on. In fact, all the upstream, downstream approach tower need to know what is going on. And in our training, we always state the importance of the controller grabbing what the pilot said, okay? Because this information is very important to us to disseminate the information to the rest of all the parties which will handle emergency. Could be the tower, could be the fire rescue units, could be any other units which will be handling an emergency
Just
subsequently.
quick question on that part. What kind of information do you expect from us during this kind of scenarios? For example, do you want us to know the natures, the time, or what kind of support? What is the list or the wish list from the controllers?
Okay, basically, what we need is a general description of your problem. Not too details, not your ICAS message or ECAM message, obviously, because we don't know what they mean to us. Very little ATC will know what they mean. So more likely, if you have a hydraulic problem, just say it, hydraulic problem. If you have a landing gear problem, just give us a general description. And if you have an engine problem, you may say you have shut down an engine, or you may say you have an engine power problem. So, but these details, these little details to ATC is important because if you have an engine shut down versus you have an engine on idle power only, it could make a big differences in the considerations how we would handle your emergency. Okay, so a little bit of details, but not too much. Okay, would help. Okay, someone I would say a general aviation worker will understand what the problem is, will be sufficient. Okay, and obviously at last we will give you time, and we always talk about time. Actually, time is two ways. One way we will give you time for you to handle your checklist, to formulate a plan, and also time is to us to formulate our own plan. Okay, so if you have very short time, like you want to return to the aerodrome immediately, obviously not only you have very little time, but the ATC will have very little time in organizing the return. Maybe you want to make a 180 turn, then we have to bring the aircraft behind around, switch the one-way, or to bring anybody in your way out of the way. Right. Okay, and then we have to reorganize everything. Okay, so a little bit of concept about assist. So in general, it is about communicate to the aircraft emergency, separate whoever is in your way, and of course separate those who are not emergencies, and also coordinate with all the parties who want and needed to know about your emergencies and subsequently bring you back. So some considerations already mentioned. Initial actions is to acknowledge your call, and then if I'm a working controller, very quickly I will think about two scenarios. First is, what should I do if you say you need an immediate return? Immediately means now, okay? Which is rarely happens this way nowadays. And the other way is a delayed return, which means that probably leave your room where I can put you to an area which is clear of other traffic with minimum interruption, so you can run your checklist and diagnose the problem, and we can formulate our own plan how to bring you back. Okay? And as we say here, prepare the aircraft ready to return. And some other factors like what is the weather here, where's the nearest airport, what are the facilities available, etc. Here we say initial actions by ATC. Acknowledge the aircraft if the call is just your mayday call or pan call or your statement of having a problem. Obviously, as I mentioned before, the controller are trained to get what you say as exactly what it is and pass the message on to the supervisors, to other units that need to know. Whether you need to squawk 7700, well, is some consideration. We may ask you to squawk 7700, which the whole center would immediately know an emergency is going on, versus just perhaps one party in the center. Okay, so this about situational awareness of ATC. Okay? And we will consider vectoring aircraft around, as I mentioned before, radio silence. Actually, I mentioned a bit of this point before we go through this PowerPoint already. Yeah, so nearest suitable aerodrome, etc. And also the time that required to bring you back. Okay, so those are the considerations. We also, if I'm a supervisor, I would also like to think about how I can reduce the workload to the ATC controller. The emergency may be happening at a busy day, in a busy time of a sector. So I may delegate someone to help him out, okay? Or I need someone to help me out. Or simply speaking is, I may want to split my sector into a smaller section so I can focus my handling in this emergency aircraft, while my colleagues are handling the others. It's not always, to my personal point of view, it doesn't always work to the benefits of ATC. Sometimes, because if you split the sector, you have more coordination. The controller next to you may not know what actually you're planning. So it really depends on the situation, the manpower, and the design of the airspace, how it's going to work. Okay? And obviously, there's a lot of, the ATC work as a team, they never work alone. Although to the pilot's point of view, a lot of times you're hearing just the controller's voice. But behind him, they have the supervisors, other colleagues around them, which they will help. We have support staff. We will, if we have a emergency return, we need to alert the fire rescue units or other units which handle the emergencies. So these guys will obviously help us to disseminate the information. We may also ask other aircraft in the vicinity to help, but this is less likely in a IFR environment or in a modern, jet environment. Some of these points could be for the for GAs or for the leisure flyers. Say he have an inadvertent entry of into IFR conditions, or he have a small problem that nobody in the room will know how to solve it, then we may seek help from outsiders. So because we are on the ground, we have all the communication facilities available. So whenever we think that help the situation, we may bring in the help. But mostly is the supervisors, colleagues, and the fire rescue units on the ground that could help immediately. And obviously, two types of scenario: an immediate return and a delayed landing. That we'll have to go through, as I mentioned, as a first response to the emergency. If I'm the controller, I will already think about this two situation. Okay, first thing is immediate landing. What is the runway available? What directions will be most beneficial to the aircraft? And delay landing is the fuel jettions or fuel burn, depends on your aircraft type, etc. And if you do return, I will start to consider what type of approaches you would need or you would prefer. Obviously, if you have a particular preference, do let us know. We will facilitate as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Okay, which one way you want to do it. Yeah. Okay, which direction, what types of approach you want. And we also consider if you have you have an engine out, you're on a single engine, so your go around may be difficult. Mm-hmm. Or if you have a power setting problem, you may be difficult to go around. So in terms of separation with other aircraft, spacing, we'll give extra spacing to facilitate. Okay, and some of the rest is just thoughts we train a controller. Sometimes the aircraft may want to do a flyby over the runway to inspect like undercarriages, mm-hmm. etc., and to check for damages and just other options.
Sorry, just a quick question, Jeff. In Hong Kong nowadays it's so busy, and it's basically about 5 miles or 4 miles separations on arrival. In case of, let's say, an aircraft carry out emergency landing, what separations do you usually provide for the aircraft following, or you just assume the runway to be closed and revert to a single runway move for 5 minutes?
That's a very good question, and that comes back to the origin of the problem. What is your emergency? Let's say if you have a hydraulic problem, which affects steering, then we will anticipate there may be a bucklage of the runway. So obviously we will not bring the subsequent aircraft on the same runway as yours. So we will perhaps bring 3 or 4 or 5 aircraft behind to land on the different runway. That is given that in Hong Kong we have 2 runways available. Okay, if in elsewhere, if you have a single runway, then obviously you may have to give maybe 5 minutes of time, at least 10, if you need to tow it away, to facilitate. So that is actually a very good point, because in ATC, handling emergency of a particular aircraft is, of course, the big job. But at the same time, we have to consider what services we are providing to those other aircraft, because we are serving the public. So to ATC is always tackling 2 problems at once. One is the aircraft emergency, and the second is how about the other aircraft in the air? We have to still take care of them. Okay, so back to your question. Usually we'll put 3 to 5 aircraft behind the land on a different runway, so to facilitate if it's anticipate that the runway will be blocked. Yep. So here in the consideration, it may be the approach speed will be different. So if I'm the working controller, I would always ask this question: what will be your final approach speed? Okay, or do you need to make an early deceleration if you have a flap or control problem? You may want to do that, or you have a gravity extension that you may want to slow down early. Okay, so these are the little considerations. The aircraft emergency obviously need more time to configure, maybe a longer final. So all these are considerations from ATC. Yeah, this is a very long list, so I don't intend to go through all of them. So here is that, yeah, provide express spacing between preceding and succeeding aircraft. This is the spelling error there. Proceeding. Preceding. Yep. Arrange aircraft to land on different runway. And yes, rescue vehicles will be on standby if you are coming back on an emergency for most of the cases. I can't think of a case that they won't be. Yeah. Okay.
So thank you, Jeff. I think from the pilot side, we find out more about what our controllers would like to know from us when we are dealing with these emergencies. What are the critical factors that they would like to find out to help them to assist us, but also to help them to do their job as well. So I think the next part is we're going through some few scenarios of emergencies, just to highlight the considerations or the workflow, the work pattern from both sides, from both parties.
Just hang on a moment.
Yeah, the 5 scenarios that we have chosen are the engine failures after takeoff from runway 07 right, rejected takeoff, unreliable airspeed, hydraulic problems, missed approach, and we'll be discussing these problems from both perspectives. We'll tackle the first scenario, and then will be the most anticipated break time. So please bear with us. Engine failure after takeoff, and we also to highlight 07 right because it's more restrictive. From the pilot perspective, at the moment when we have engine failure and a problem after takeoff, workload in the cockpit increase significantly, and as we have discussed before, we always fly or aviate, navigate, communicate, so we have to fly the aircraft. Because of the, it depends on the mode of failure. Sometimes it may still give you some thrust in the most drastic or most critical scenarios. You will have lot thrust completely from one engine, which which take us a lot of not capacity, but we have to make sure the aircraft is under our control and to fly the aircraft to the correct trajectory. There are system actions, as Jeff mentioned, ECAM or ICAS, depends on what aircraft type you're flying, to followed. And this is very important. Most of the time when there's an engine failure, the procedures ask us to shut down an engine. there are 2 engines, sometimes 3. This one failed. If it's 2 engines, I guess guy was say, oh, it's 50-50. No, it's not 50-50. We have to make sure this is the correct engines. And I'm sure everyone can name a few cases where the wrong engines have been incorrectly shut down, and then accidents happen afterwards. So that part we have to dedicate our attentions to that procedures. And afterwards, we have to carry out the checklist. Once we've got everything under control, we have to think about what next. We're going to come back to land. We have to prepare for approach, and sometimes it depends on again what kind of failures and the state of the aircraft. It might take 5-10 minutes, or it may take a bit longer to prepare the aircraft to land. And it will be nice if we can enter the whole pattern, because that way that can reduce our workload in terms of flying or navigate the aircraft, and that will give us more capacity to plan and prepare the aircraft to land. And jettisons, it depends on the aircraft as well. Some aircraft, they have fuel jettison capabilities, and it sort of depends on the nature of the failures. If it's serious problem, then we might just carry out an overweight landing checklist and land the aircraft at overweight. In some other scenarios, we may consider fuel jettison if that facility is available. With the engines in op or failed, most of the time the handling capabilities of the aircraft is reduced. And also because of that, we might have to carry out, depends on the aircraft type again, we might have to carry out gravity gear extension, which means we may lose steering capability once we land on the runway. 07 departure is more significant, as will be highlighted later on. The departure path is surrounded by terrain. I wonder, the controllers, do you know if we told you we are carrying out an engine out seat? Do you understand what we are referring to? Or what do you expect?
Good question. Because there's always a myth in earlier discussion with other pilots that we know all about your engine outfits for all various airlines and operators. And the fact that the ATC have no idea what are the details of the engine outfit, okay, doesn't mean that they don't understand what engine outfit is, which means it's a different trajectory from the normal SID, a different climb gradient, and different terrain clearance. But I'll also talk about this a little bit later.
Sure, just mentioning that because every operators, they have their own departments, and they can calculate and plan for their contingencies, SIDs. And that's why sometimes if you just mentioned engine out seat, your controller friends will be they can expect something's going to be different, but they don't know what to expect sometimes, because it's impossible for the controllers to know all the operators' contingency plan. Also, in terms of heavy weight, when we're departing 07, terrain clearance is especially important, and I've briefly mentioned about the considerations in the previous slide, and also with heavyweight landing or overweight landing, there may be hot brakes and subsequently fry hatches after we've touched down. So have it, Jeff.
Thank you, Henry. Next, we would like to talk about ATC perspective. However, the clock is ticking, John, yes? And I think this at this moment is time for a tea break. Or you would like to carry on before I complete? Yeah. Okay, we'll finish it. Okay, very good. So engine failure after departure from ATC perspective. So as you point out, a very good question. ATC have no details about all the different yields that you have operating. So, and we are, as a controller, trained to be vigilant and to have a duty of care. So as soon as you depart from the SID track, actually the management or as a normal controller will start to query what is going on with this aircraft. And because as you mentioned, for 07 or even for 25, the terrain is very important threat to this aircraft operating close to terrain. So if you, without any telling, the controller will very quickly query you, you are deviating off the SID, turn left or terrain ahead, such and such. So whenever you need to carry out a EOSIT, let us know as soon as you can. So we will be prepared that, okay, you are departing from the SID, and we will take other actions, like there may be helicopters flying below the EOSIT track that we will need to get them out of the way, okay? And also some other perspective, like on an engine out, is like considerations for ATC is, when did that engine out happen? Is it after you got airborne, clear of the one-way, or after V1, you're even on the one-way? And what caused, and then the ATC will start to think, oh, what caused the engine out? Maybe it's FOD, maybe you have some debris on the one-way. So not only we have to handle this aircraft emergency, but we also need to get the runway inspected, or we have to warn traffic behind, maybe you have a bird strike, etc. And if you are saying that you have to come back for immediate landing, we have to very quickly stop the departures, get the traffic on final, whoever would be in your way away. So this is the consideration from ATC. But as I said last, is once the emergency is declared with an EOSIT scenario, engine out scenario, we will expect you to do your own thing until you are ready to talk to us again about what course of action you're going to get. Okay, you want to discuss about the terrain? Yeah. So here is the terrain around Hong Kong. Actually, what I want to do talk about is something quite rare, but more or less refer to the Hudson River cases. There's not one engine out, but two engine out. If you depart from 07, if you're in an engine out, this is about 6 miles down here. Anything south of the 6 miles departure track is terrain. So, and we have our own procedures. We can't really vector you down here below 3, but vectoring is when aircraft is not emergency, it's normal handling. But the controllers are trained not to vector this aircraft towards terrain. So even if you have a emergency, it is very challenging, and it put the controller in a very difficult perspective. If you say once you got both engine out, you want to make a quick turnaround because of the terrain down here. If you have to leave you at 3, then you'll be high on final. But anything below 3 is difficult. So I always think if in this scenario, the best thing is to, if you can remain in VMC, then it's easier for us to bring you around. Yeah, it's just a little thought that I was always thinking in my mind after referring to the Hudson River incident is if I have an aircraft, have both engines out on departure on 07, how I would handle it. It's very difficult. Yeah. You have anything to add with this?
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank